She said she was spending Christmas Eve at her sister's cabin. I drove up to deliver her gift, and through the window saw her on the couch making out with a guy in a Santa hat. When I knocked, Christmas Eve should have been predictable. Mine usually was. My routine never changed much. Finish work at the auto shop early, drop off gifts to my parents, watch the same stupid comedy movie for the 20th year in a row, and call it a night. Tradition kept things simple, safe, steady. But this year felt off from the start. Kira had been distant for weeks and never explained why. The kind of distance that settles into a room like fog. Cold, thick, and impossible to ignore. She'd stopped talking about her plans, dodged questions about her schedule, and kept her phone face down. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was quiet. A slow slide in the dark where I didn't even realize I was losing footing until my stomach dropped. 3 days before Christmas, she told me she needed space. Not forever, not a breakup, just a breather. She said she wanted to spend Christmas Eve at her sister's cabin in the mountains, a place they apparently used when life got stressful. She made it sound harmless, like a self-care retreat with hot chocolate and weighted blankets. I tried to believe her because believing her felt easier than considering the alternative. By Christmas morning, I convinced myself she was fine, that things weren't as bad as they felt. I had a gift for her, a hand-carved wooden box I spent a month shaping after work, and I wanted to give it to her in person. The drive wasn't far. The surprise would be sweet. Maybe it would soften the tension. Maybe this gesture would show I cared enough to drive through snow to deliver something I didn't want her to open alone in an empty cabin. That was the bet. Fix the distance. Reset the tone. Bring things back to what they were before everything felt like wet sand slipping through my fingers. The snow started coming down harder than the weather forecast promised. Thick flakes spiraled toward the windshield, turning the highway into a white tunnel. The wipers worked overtime. The radio cut in and out. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the gift box in the passenger seat, steadying it whenever the car slid a little on icy patches. The cabin Kira described was tucked up a narrow hillside road that barely fit 2 cars. Pines leaned over the path like spectators watching me squeeze past. By the time I reached the clearing, the world felt muted, sealed by a blanket of snow. Her car was there. That was the first jolt. I expected it, but seeing it parked at a weird angle, crooked, like someone pulled up in a hurry, made something warm in my chest cool down. The porch lights were on. A thin stripe of warm yellow shone through the curtains. I told myself she was inside reading, or drinking tea, or journaling about whatever stress she refused to share. My boots crunched through fresh snow as I walked toward the window. My curiosity dragged me past. Just one glance, I told myself. I didn't want to scare her by bursting through the door, and I didn't want to ruin a peaceful moment if she was finally calming down. That tiny justification, the soft lie we tell ourselves when we sense the truth is hiding behind a door, pushed me closer. I stepped under the window frame. What I saw didn't compute at first. My brain couldn't align the pieces. The reflection of firelight. A couch. A bare shoulder. Someone leaning forward. Someone else leaning back. Then the shapes sharpened. Kira. A man in a Santa hat. Their mouths together. Her legs across his lap. Her hand on his neck like she had known it for a long time. The air left my lungs in an instant. The cold hit the inside of my chest in a way that made it hard to swallow. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just a hard stop inside me. A shutdown. The world grabbed me by the collar and said, "Pay attention." For several seconds, I didn't move. Not out of shock, not out of fear, but because everything inside me demanded stillness so I could understand what I was seeing. The simple truth that didn't need imagination or interpretation. Inside that cabin, on Christmas Eve, she was kissing someone who wasn't me. Someone comfortable enough to have his shoes off and his hand under the blanket covering her legs. Someone who clearly knew she wasn't spending the holiday alone. My hand tightened around the gift box until the wood pressed into my palm. I could have turned around. I could have walked back to the car and pretended I never came. I could have saved myself the crash that was about to happen. But I knocked. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted her to see me see her. The first knock startled them. She pulled back and looked toward the door with a confused smile, the kind people wear when they expect a friend. She didn't even recognize the possibility that it might be me. That alone cut deeper than the kiss. She stood, fixed her shirt, and casually walked to the door. No panic, no fear, not even guilt. Just mild annoyance, like someone interrupted her during a movie. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with snow on my jacket and a handmade gift in my hand, her face changed, but not in the way I expected. No remorse, no shock, just irritation mixed with something like disbelief that I had shown up. She asked what I was doing there. Her voice was flat, nearly bored. The guy on the couch shouted something in a playful tone, asking if she needed him. That was moment 2. The moment the floor opened underneath everything I thought I knew. She didn't step aside to let me in. She didn't explain. She didn't care that I saw them. She acted like I was the one intruding. I pushed past her anyway. I wasn't rude, but I wasn't going to stand outside while she pretended this scene made sense. The cabin smelled like cinnamon and wine. 2 glasses sat on the table. Her phone lay screen up beside them. 8 unread messages from me. 3 missed calls. She hadn't even bothered to hide them. The guy on the couch looked me over with the lazy confidence of someone who believed he had already won. He didn't stand. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even adjust himself under the blanket where her legs had just been. He only smirked. A smirk that explained everything without a word. Kira moved to stand between us, but not protectively. More like she wanted to block any chance of an argument that would inconvenience her. She said I should have called first. She said I took things too seriously. She said I shouldn't make Christmas into drama. Her tone was calm, sharp, detached, as if she'd rehearsed this. As if she believed the best strategy was to make me feel unreasonable for reacting. I didn't shout. I didn't crumble. I didn't negotiate. I just watched her and realized I didn't recognize the person talking. She had changed gradually in the past month, and this moment made all those tiny shifts fall into place. And then the wind delivered the first real twist. A heavy draft slammed into the cabin, pushing the half-latched door wider. A gust blasted across the floor, knocking over a bag by the shoe rack. Clothes spilled out, not cozy cabin basics, but club dresses, makeup kits, and 2 wrapped gifts addressed to no one I recognized. The details clicked like puzzle pieces snapping into place. She wasn't here for a breather. She hadn't packed like someone planning to come home the next day. She wasn't stressed. She wasn't confused. She was building a life that didn't include me, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. The guy in the Santa hat stretched and reached for his glass again, utterly unbothered. Snow blew into the cabin as I looked at the mess, the blanket, the glasses, the couch, the man, and then Kira standing between us with a look that said she wished I'd just disappear. That was the moment the story really began. The moment I understood that whatever explanation she was ready to offer would be nothing but a doorway to something even worse. Kira shut the door against the wind, but the damage was done. Her packed bag sat open like a confession she never planned to give. The guy on the couch didn't even glance down at it. He wasn't startled because he wasn't worried. That bothered me more than the kiss I'd witnessed through the window. Confidence like that doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from clarity. It comes from knowing exactly where you stand in someone's life. Kira walked past me and started scooping clothes back into the bag with fast, irritated movements. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't even look conflicted. She looked inconvenienced, like a traveler whose flight had just been delayed. I asked who he was. She didn't answer. The guy did. He leaned forward, rested his arms on his knees, and introduced himself as Ross. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't soften his tone. He said his full name with the lazy pride of someone used to getting reactions. And he got one, just not the one he expected. His last name punched straight through the fog in my head. I knew it. Not because we'd met before, but because the name was printed on the card of the bar where Kira claimed she'd picked up extra shifts for holiday money. Everything rearranged in my mind. The last 2 months. The late nights. The sudden sister bonding weekends. The nights she said she fell asleep early. All the explanations she fed me like small doses of medicine meant to keep me quiet. Now the pieces clicked together. This wasn't holiday stress. This wasn't a one-time slip. She had built a full second life, and I was standing in the middle of it. Ross picked up his wine glass and said they'd been seeing each other for months. He said it casually, almost cheerfully, like he was making conversation at a dinner table. He didn't look at her when he said it. He didn't need to. Kira spun around fast and told him to shut up. Not deny, not clarify. Shut up. That told me everything. She lunged toward him like she could shove the words back into his mouth, but he just leaned away, smiling. The smile of someone who wasn't blindsided. Someone who believed he had nothing to lose. I asked her again how long this had been going on. She said I didn't get to interrogate her in someone else's home. Someone else's? The cabin belonged to her sister, but in that moment the ownership didn't matter. What mattered was how comfortable she felt telling me I didn't belong there while the guy she'd been kissing took another drink without a flicker of discomfort. I told her she should at least respect me enough to tell the truth. She threw up her hands and said the truth wouldn't change anything. Ross laughed under his breath like the whole scene fascinated him. Then he dropped the second twist, the one that made Kira freeze mid-step. He said she told him she was single and planning to move in with him in January. My brain stuttered. Kira's eyes went wide. She rushed toward him again, insisting he misunderstood, but he held up a hand and told her to stop talking. He wasn't amused anymore. Something flickered across his face. Realization mixed with irritation, the kind that hits a man when he suddenly sees he wasn't smarter than the situation after all. It dawned on him that she'd lied to him, too, the same way she had lied to me. The room shifted then. Not physically, emotionally. Her control cracked. The certainty she stood on started to wobble. She grabbed at his arm like she could pull him back into the script she had written. She said they talked about moving in only as a joke. She said he was twisting things. She said I was creating tension. Ross stood up slowly. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself like someone used to being the loudest presence in a room. His expression hardened in a way that told me this wasn't the first time he had dealt with lies, just the first time he realized he wasn't the one weaving them. He asked her how many men she'd fed the same story to. She didn't answer. Her silence was an answer. He told her to stay away from him, stepped into his boots, and headed for the door. Kira panicked for the first time since I arrived. Not because I caught her cheating, because she realized the guy she had balanced her life around was slipping out of it faster than she could reach him. She lunged toward him and slipped on the wet hardwood where snow had blown inside earlier. She hit her elbow on the floor, cursed sharply, and scrambled back up, but Ross didn't pause. He opened the door and stepped outside into the snow. I followed him out, not to defend Kira, not to argue, but because something about this unfolding demanded clarity. The cold slapped both of us as we stepped into the open. Christmas lights glowed on cabin porches across the clearing. A couple of neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, probably drawn by the earlier shouting. Ross lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Not emotional shaking, angry shaking. He said he should have known. He said she always dodged simple questions. He said the moving-in plan made sense now. He laughed once, a loud bark that carried across the snow. Kira stumbled out behind us. She begged him to come back inside, begged him to talk like adults, begged him to forget everything until after the holidays. The begging told me more about her than all the lies combined. She wasn't shocked at being caught. She was terrified of losing her backup plan. Ross asked her why her phone showed messages from 3 different men who all used nicknames for her, and not one of them was mine. She froze. He held up her phone. It must have fallen out of her pocket when she slipped earlier. 6 lock screen notifications. 3 different men. Short messages. Suggestive emojis. Holiday plans. Rooms booked. Promises made. The world didn't tilt. I didn't stagger. I didn't unravel. Instead, a numb quiet settled in. Not detachment, clarity. A plain, heavy clarity that made everything feel simple for the first time since I drove up that mountain. Kira rushed toward him again. He stepped back and told her not to touch him. He called her a waste of his time. He said he never should have trusted someone who refused to introduce him to friends or family. Neighbors opened doors now. The cold made voices carry. The scene wasn't private anymore. Kira's panic mutated into anger. She rounded on me and demanded I stop Ross from leaving, as if I owed her protection from the fallout she created. I asked her why she thought I'd help her keep someone she'd been planning a life with behind my back. Her face twisted into something I'd never seen before, frustration strangling into desperation. She said I was being dramatic. She said people make mistakes. She said the holidays are stressful. And then, in a moment that snapped something inside me, she said I drove up uninvited and created the problem. Not the affair. Not the lies. Not the double life. My presence. Ross laughed again, louder this time. He shook his head, flicked ash into the snow, and said he hoped she never spoke to him again. Then he stomped away down the hill, disappearing behind a row of pines. Kira stood in the snow staring after him, breath fogging in sharp little bursts. She looked back at me with a face full of anger, accusation, and fear, all tangled together in a way that made one thing certain. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't reflective. She was cornered. And cornered people choose chaos. She snatched her phone out of the snow, saw the cracked screen, and screamed in frustration. She turned that frustration on me and accused me of ruining her life. Lights flicked on in neighboring cabins. Silhouettes appeared in windows. The whole clearing witnessed her unraveling. She demanded I drive her home. I didn't answer her. That silence hit her harder than any argument could. She grabbed my sleeve like she could force a reaction, but I stepped back. She slipped again, caught herself, and stood there shivering in the porch light while the weight of her situation settled on her shoulders. She wasn't juggling 2 lives. She was juggling 4. And Christmas Eve was when the balls finally hit the ground. The snow kept falling in slow, stubborn flakes, settling on Kira's hair as she stood in the porch light. Her breaths came out in short bursts, not from the cold, but from the panic creeping in. It was the look of someone who hadn't planned for this part of the script. Cheating, she could manage. Juggling multiple men, she could manage. But getting caught in front of neighbors, exposed by her own phone, and abandoned by the guy she'd been building her fantasy with, this was new territory. I stepped away from her and moved toward my car. Not to leave, not yet, but to get distance from the chaos she kept trying to drag me into. The cabin door swung open behind us, and another wave of warm air floated out. But instead of her voice following, it was a different one. Her sister stood in the doorway. I recognized her only from the single picture Kira had ever shown me, a birthday dinner photo from months ago. They didn't look alike. Her sister had a calmer, more grounded presence, the kind of energy that fills a room without raising its volume. She wore a heavy sweater and held a mug of tea, staring at us with a confusion that had already started shifting into something sharper. She asked what was going on. Not dramatically, not playfully, just directly. Kira whipped around and tried to spin the scene instantly. She blamed me. She blamed Ross. She blamed the weather for putting everyone in a bad mood. She spoke fast, stacking sentences like bricks, trying to build a wall before her sister understood what she'd walked in on. But her sister wasn't fooled. You don't grow up with someone like Kira without learning how to read the wind. She stepped outside, ignoring the cold, and looked at me first, not her sister. That alone told me who she trusted more. She asked me quietly if I needed help. That question jolted Kira. She started arguing that everything was a misunderstanding, that I'd shown up uninvited, that Ross had overreacted, that she'd slip on the ice, hit her elbow, and the whole evening spiraled. Her sister didn't even look at her while she explained. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, waiting for the truth. So I told her, calm, steady, without embellishing. The window, the kiss, the open bag, the wine glasses, the lies, the man storming off, the other men texting, the names, the timelines. And for the first time that night, Kira's sister reacted. Not with shock, not with anger, with resignation. As if she had expected this for a long time, but hoped it wouldn't happen again. That's what hit me, the word again. She asked Kira if any of what I said was false. Kira didn't answer. Her silence was heavy, frozen, loud enough to echo. Her sister sighed, the kind of sigh that belongs to someone who has carried the weight of someone else's chaos far too long. She told her she couldn't have this inside the cabin tonight, not on Christmas Eve, not after everything they just talked about earlier. Kira snapped instantly. She said her own family was turning against her. She said everyone was overreacting. She said none of this would have happened if men simply stayed in their lanes. Her sister didn't engage. She turned to go back inside, but not before saying something that froze the air more than the weather ever could. She said their mother warned them this would happen. She said their mother predicted Kira would ruin Christmas for someone. She said she was sorry I got caught in the fallout. The door closed softly behind her. No slam, no dramatic exit, just a quiet line drawn that Kira couldn't erase. For the first time since I arrived, Kira's bravado cracked for real. Not because of me, not because of Ross, but because her family had finally stopped cushioning her from consequences. The panic returned, sharper now. She ran toward the cabin, but the door was locked. Her sister didn't open it, even when she banged on it. Kira shouted that she had nowhere else to go. Her sister replied through the door that she should call one of her many friends. The sarcasm was faint but unmistakable. That moment didn't feel like drama. It felt like years of frustration finally snapping into the open. Kira spun around toward me, her eyes wild, her breath steaming through clenched teeth. She told me I had to drive her home because I owed her that much after embarrassing her in front of everyone. I told her I wasn't her ride. Not tonight. Her face twisted, not with sadness, but with fury. She stormed down the steps with jerky, determined movements and marched toward my car, as if she could force the situation by grabbing the handle and climbing in. I stepped in front of her. She tried to push past me. Her boots slid on the icy ground. She grabbed my jacket for balance, but I pulled away. My silence was its own answer. Her eyes scanned the clearing as if looking for another option, another person to manipulate, another outcome she could twist to her advantage. But the neighbors who had witnessed the earlier argument were already gone from the windows, curtains shut against the cold and the drama. The clearing felt larger now, emptier, more echoing. Kira's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down, her face drained. Another man's name lit up the cracked screen. A short message, asking if she was still coming tonight. Plans, time, location. She pressed the phone to her chest like she could hide it from the world, but it was too late. Whether I saw the name or not didn't matter anymore. Her life had already unraveled past the point of secrets. Snow collected on her hair as she stood motionless, shoulders rising and falling in sharp breaths. Not remorse, not realization. Survival mode. She tried one more tactic. A softer voice, a trembling tone, a plea for forgiveness wrapped in vague promises about fixing things after the holidays. But her timing was off. Her face was tight with fear, not sincerity. Her tone cracked on the edges, not with emotion, but with desperation. I didn't say anything cruel. I didn't scold her. I didn't moralize. I simply told her I was leaving and she should find her own way home. That made something inside her snap. She shouted that I would regret this. She shouted that Ross would regret this. She shouted that her mother would take her side when she explained what actually happened. Her sister opened the door just long enough to tell her to keep her voice down and then shut it again. The clearing fell quiet except for the sound of wind hissing through trees and the soft shuffle of snow sliding off branches. I opened my car door. Kira ran toward me again, grabbing the frame. But this time she didn't slip. This time she held on. She asked what I would tell people. She asked if I would keep things private. She asked if I would at least protect her reputation. Those questions revealed everything. She wasn't worried about us. She wasn't worried about the betrayal. She wasn't even worried about losing Ross. She was worried about exposure. Exposure threatens people who build their lives on illusions. I didn't answer her. She tried to hold the door open when I got inside, but I gently pushed her arm away. Her voice rose again, sharper now, but the words were empty. Just noise flung into the cold. When the door shut, the sound was final. Not symbolic. Just real. She stepped back as I started the engine. Headlights cut across the clearing, illuminating her standing alone in the snow. She didn't look broken. She looked calculating, like she was already trying to rearrange the pieces of her life into a new configuration she could control. Her sister cracked the door again, called her name, and told her to come inside before she froze. She hesitated. She looked at me. She looked at the cabin. She looked at her phone. Then she walked toward the porch with the stiff posture of someone who had just lost a game she didn't know she was playing. When I drove away, she was still standing under the porch light, her sister blocking the doorway, both of them locked in a quiet standoff. The road down the mountain twisted through trees that looked like shadows holding their breath. My hand stayed loose on the wheel, steady despite the ice. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel devastated. I felt done with pretending confusion where there was none. But the consequences were nowhere near finished. Not even close. The drive home took longer than the trip up the mountain. Not because of the snow, not because of traffic, but because I kept replaying the scene without meaning to. Not the kiss. Not even the fight outside. What stuck with me most was Kira's face when her sister refused to shelter her. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't guilt. It was fear of losing the narrative she depended on. The next morning, everything felt muted. My apartment seemed colder even though the heater was running. Her gift box sat on the kitchen table, still wrapped, the carving hidden inside. I wasn't sure whether to throw it out or keep it as a reminder, so I did nothing. It stayed exactly where I put it. By noon, my phone started buzzing. At first it was texts, then missed calls, then voicemails. They came in clusters, like she was trying different emotional tones hoping one would stick. The early messages were hostile. Accusations. Demands. Blame. The next wave tried to sound calm. She wrote about stress, misunderstandings, her sister being dramatic, me taking things too seriously. Then her voice cracked in the voicemails. Not with remorse. With fear. Fear of losing control of the image she'd curated. I didn't respond. Around 5 in the afternoon, someone knocked on my door. A rhythmic knock. Urgent. I didn't need a peephole to know who it was. Something in my chest tightened anyway. When I opened the door, Kira stood there wrapped in a coat too thin for the freezing air. Snowflakes clung to her hair, melting slowly into her collar. Her makeup was smudged, but not enough to suggest crying. More like she'd rushed through getting ready. She forced a smile that looked like it belonged to a completely different night. She launched into a rehearsed explanation about how everything had gotten out of hand, how Ross lied about the moving-in talk, how her sister misunderstood, how the messages from the other men were taken out of context. Her words came fast, layered, strategically arranged. She spoke like someone who believed she could still salvage the story if she controlled the pacing. I didn't interrupt. I let her burn through the script. Eventually she stopped and waited for my reaction. I told her calmly that nothing she said addressed the simple truth. She had been building multiple relationships behind my back. Her voice rose instantly. She said I didn't understand. She said Ross exaggerated. She said none of the other men meant anything. She said the kiss at the cabin wasn't as serious as it looked. I asked her why she'd been planning to end things with me after the holidays. Ross had said it casually, but confidently, and that confidence wasn't new. That man wasn't guessing. He was repeating something she had told him. She went silent again. Silence from her was never peaceful. It was strategic, a silent calculation happening behind her eyes. She stepped inside without waiting for permission. She moved like she still lived here, like the walls still belonged to her. The smell of her perfume followed her in, familiar in a way that no longer felt warm. She walked around my living room touching things absent-mindedly. Books, coasters, the back of the couch, like she was checking how much of her presence still lingered. Then she turned and said something that revealed everything. She said she chose me. Those 3 words were supposed to reassure, but they dropped into the room like a stone. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't taking responsibility. She was announcing a decision she expected me to validate. I asked her why she wanted to stay with me after everything she'd built elsewhere. She didn't flinch. She said I was stable. She said I was reliable. She said I never disappointed her. Each compliment landed like a shove. Not because they were harsh, but because they weren't about love or connection. They were about utility. She saw me as an anchor, a fallback, a safety net, someone to hold her life steady while she explored every other option. That realization didn't break me. It clarified things. I told her we weren't getting back together. Her expression shifted instantly, tightening like a wire pulled too hard. She repeated herself. She said she chose me. Her tone suggested the choice was binding. I stayed calm. I told her again that we were done. And that's when the real climax hit. She snapped. Not loudly. Not violently. Her voice flattened and sharpened, like steel cooling after being pulled from a flame. She said she would tell people I hit her. She said she would tell her family I manipulated her. She said she would tell Ross that I threatened him. Each threat landed without hesitation. Not empty. Not exaggerated. Prepared. Practiced. It was the exact moment I finally understood how deeply she relied on rewriting stories to suit her needs. I told her to leave. She refused. I walked to the door and opened it. The gesture wasn't dramatic. It was final. That simple action broke her momentum. She stepped into the hallway but turned back to deliver her last attempt at control. She said I was making a mistake. She said things would get worse for both of us if I didn't cooperate. I didn't respond. She left in a storm of frustration disguised as dignity. An hour later, her sister called me. She apologized for everything. She said she found out Kira had not only lied to me and Ross, but had been taking money from a third man. She said their mother was furious and had told Kira not to come home until she sorted herself out. 2 days later, Ross filed a complaint at his workplace because Kira had used him to get better shifts. Her boss suspended her pending investigation because mixing personal and professional boundaries violated their policies. A week later, her roommates kicked her out after discovering she had taken rent money from them but never paid the landlord. She had spent it on trips and weekends she'd claimed were work retreats. All of this unfolded without my involvement. I stayed out of it completely. Her actions worked against her without any push from me. 3 weeks later, she sent one last message. A single line about missing stability. Not missing me. Missing what I represented. I didn't reply. Winter melted slowly into the wet gray of early spring. I went back to work, back to meal prep, back to normal human routines. Nothing dramatic. Just life. And as life steadied, so did I. Months later, I started dating again, slowly, quietly, without rushing for replacement or revenge. I wasn't searching for meaning through someone else's chaos. I was rebuilding from something that had finally collapsed. The following Christmas Eve, almost a year later, I drove past that same stretch of mountain road on my way to visit friends. I saw the cabin from the distance. Dark, quiet, unlit. A simple building sitting in the snow, empty of noise or secrets. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel nostalgia. Just a calm reminder that some storms burn themselves out once they run out of places to hide. And sometimes the only way to uncover the truth is to show up unannounced with a gift you never get to give.